Welcome to Voices in the Wilderness, conversations about church and leader health. Thank you so much for listening. We encourage you to keep the conversation going. Voices in the Wilderness is brought to you by Preparing for Amazement Ministries, where we empower and equip churches and leaders to create lasting and transformational health. Visit amazed15.org to learn more. We also welcome any comments or suggestions. Simply email us at podcast@amazed15.org. My name is Marcus Carlson, and today our guest is Andrea Paulson. Good to have you. We've had some technical stuff, so we'll see how this goes, but we're excited. We're starting a new series in the podcast, Things I Wish I Knew. And so we're talking to ministry leaders about what are the things that you wished you had learned sooner or known sooner or been warned about or experienced sooner, because we all have a list of things. But before we dive into that, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself? Because I think this is your first time on the podcast, which, we got to fix that. But tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. I have been in ministry 18 years. Started in ministry as a youth director at a church in Fargo, North Dakota. I served in director of youth ministry for 8 years, focusing on junior high confirmation and senior high and college age ministry. Started in seminary in September of 2012 with absolutely no desire to be a pastor,
Hmm.
and God had other plans. In 2016, I was ordained and took my first call as an associate pastor in central Nebraska. And then on March 20th of 2020, I began my role as a lead pastor in Holly, Minnesota. So it's been quite the trip.
Yeah, literally starting a new church position as COVID is literally happening. That must have been interesting.
Literally.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was an experience. But this is my 7th summer here, so it's nuts to believe that I've been, in this role now for 7 years and just kinda seeing what God has done and whew.
Awesome. Well, what are some things that you wished you knew about ministry sooner?
Well, I think how to make Zoom work when you wanna do something like this would have been helpful. What do you do when your Wi-Fi doesn't wanna work? No, that's actually it just fits today. Because 'cause isn't that exactly how ministry goes, right? It's like it's always something. You like I was telling Marcus that as we were starting, this never happens. We do meetings like this all the time. You and I have had meetings like this, and it's never like this, but, so what are something I wish I would have knew when I started ministry?
Or even just sooner than you learned it. Like, man, if I learned that 3 years earlier, that would have been really helpful.
Oh gosh. Yeah. I think I think one of the things that I think about this a lot having had my 8 years of youth ministry experience. I think one of them I never and still don't. I had no intention or desire to be a lead pastor. That wasn't part of my plan or what I thought I was called to. I really loved youth ministry and I still love youth ministry. And I think one of the things, as somebody who did not see youth ministry as like a ladder or a stepping stone, I think one thing I didn't realize is how beneficial extensive time in youth ministry is, not like 15 to 18 months, but a long season of youth ministry is for like larger pastor um, pastoring. The lessons we learn in youth ministry when we serve in it for a long amount of time teaches us a lot of beneficial lessons for the big church, larger church context. Um, I just so many things like how do you pivot? How do you pivot on the fly? What do you do when culture shifts every 3 years? Like
Mm.
so that's something youth culture shifts every 3 years, but it's not just youth culture that shifts. Culture shifts and so we have to be nimble. We have to be thinking about how do we do this differently? Or yes, we Christmas comes every year and Lent comes every year and Easter comes every year, but people's perspectives and mindsets and how they hear things and receive things shifts. And so we have to be nimble and willing to try new things. The things that in youth ministry you learn, the things that you tried 3 years ago don't resonate with the next batch of juniors in high school. And so you got to think outside the box. People are people, whether they're 15-year-old people or 65-year-old people. And being nimble is and flexible and playful. That's the other thing too. Youth ministry teaches you to be playful, to um, just play, to have joy. And then the third thing is, it takes a long time to get to harvest.
Mm,
We plant seeds, and sometimes our job is to plant, sometimes it is to tend, sometimes it is to harvest, and youth ministry keeps you humble and, keeps your eye on Jesus, keeps your eye on our task is to tend to the soil, and sometimes a lot of times in youth ministry, we're not the one doing the harvest. We're planting seeds, we're, teaching kind of foundational things that God's gonna do something with that we might not get to see the result of. And 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 that's something that I think is important to remember on those days in ministry and pastoring and preaching 52 weeks a year and all of the things in lead pastoring that make you wanna go, "Why do I keep doing this?
mm.
There is no fruit. Where's the fruit? Where's the harvest?" That's right. It's God's time, not ours. So I
Yeah,
think that's one thing I learned.
yeah, God and I have never really agree on timing. So
Never.
one of us is
Come on,
one of
Lord.
us is patient. What about like
Not I.
even yeah, yeah. What do you what are some things that you wish you maybe had learned in seminary or educational journey? Like what are some things you wish you had learned sooner uh for ministry?
We don't have enough time, for that conversation. Um, I think so I went to, Bethel Seminary, and, the thing that I'm very grateful for at Bethel is there are very few Lutherans there. It's there are a lot of the people at Bethel are coming from different mindsets, different theological streams of thought, different denominations, and so what that does is um, it really challenged me, challenges anybody to really think about why they believe what they do and why they are in the theological path that they are, the denominational path. And if you're open to the spirit, it can be a real winnowing and a sifting and help you figure out why you are where you are. And so one of the things about Bethel that I appreciated was the very different perspectives and the different mindsets and the churches who've never heard of a lectionary and don't know what a or I'm sorry, classmates that don't know what a lectionary is and don't know what a church calendar is and a liturgical calendar because a non-denominational background doesn't necessarily follow that. And so, what was cool about that is it presented me with new ways of thinking. It also, I found myself like defending things that I never, or defending or standing for things that I didn't think I was interested in. And that was great. And so, it was really deeply theological, deeply biblical, very evangelical. So that was kind of the spiritual formation, leadership formation, biblical foundation was solid. What wasn't solid, and I don't think is solid in a lot of congregation or denomination seminaries, is what do we do with this information in our great big heads? It's one thing to be able to preach and teach, but what does it matter if we can preach and teach the gospel if we're not reaching people that are in our seats? If there are not people in our pews or in our chairs. And I think the long story, because you know me and I take a long time to land a plane, is it's great to have the biblical and theological knowledge, but if we are not thinking about how to reach people outside our doors, what are we doing here? We're in going back to my previous point about youth ministry, we're in a very different world than we were pre-COVID. Every year is different. We have to know and understand how do we maximize technology? What does it mean to market your church? That's not a bad word. We're a consumeristic culture. And so if our world around us is consumeristic, we have to know how to get our message, which is the best message anywhere. We've got a better message than Nike. We have a better message and a better offer than anything you'll find in media or marketing or sports. I mean, World Cup soccer is great, but Jesus is greater, and and so we have the best message in the world, but do we know how to get that message out there? Do we know how to share what our churches are doing? How do you leverage your website? How do you leverage social media? How do you leverage um, TikTok and all of the things so that people know that your church exists and what you're doing? They don't even touch that. Like, that was nowhere in my seminary education, but it's just, um, how do we put our church out there? And it doesn't mean our church has to be, like, on the leading edge of doing things differently. There's data that shows that young generations are drawn to liturgical and cyclical styles of worship, what we would call more traditional. Every church with the message of Jesus has something to offer and something to share, and they don't teach us to think like that. I don't know if that makes sense.
It
Um,
does, and I think, some people assume that if we're paying attention to the culture and adjusting accordingly, that we're buying in, and I think you can recognize that, yeah, we're in a consumer culture, but without feeding consumerism in your church, but also recognizing, the message doesn't change, but how we communicate it does, we
yeah.
forget it wasn't that
Well,
long ago that all of our worship services were in Latin.
yeah. Well, so an example I use, and this is a conversation we have here at our church. We have a Sunday morning traditional and a Wednesday modern worship service, and they're very different. And so, um, and the um, people, the congregation that comes to each of those services, are different mindset, right? And so one of the things we've done for the last 2 years is we share our Wednesday night worship set on social media. So what we do is our worship director chooses the music for Wednesday nights, and then we put a story, we put information out and link it to a Spotify playlist with what songs we're gonna have on Wednesday night, just so people know. Partially because we're having to teach people a lot of songs because our contemporary worship has shifted dramatically in 3 years. It used to be more of a 1990s, early 2000s CCM vibe, and it's not that anymore, which is fine, but it's a lot of songs people don't really know, and so we started doing that 2 years ago of sharing the weekly playlist, linking it to a Spotify list so that people can listen to the music. And there was a lot of pushback and a lot of, frustration, hurt, um, confusion as to why we were emphasizing the Wednesday night service.
Mm.
We're not emphasizing the Wednesday night service, we're sharing with a different group of people who are
In a
maybe
different way.
seeking in a different way. It's people that maybe are not as churched or are new to a church, are listening to contemporary music and want to know like what songs there are. Like we and the number of people we have heard, specifically high schoolers who are like, "Oh, I saw the set list and I decided I was going to come to church tonight," which is kind of consumeristic, but it's also opening the door because the only thing it's not the only thing that happens in churches. We sing the song. We also share the message of the gospel. We also celebrate communion, and so that's just a small tweak, but it requires that we're able to explain our why. So
Yeah, and everything you have to have a good why and have that ready before you pull any triggers for sure. And it's not probably not the first church where there's been jealousy between one service and another. I mean, I don't think that's a new under the sun, but yeah, no, I think I get that and how to pivot and again what changes and what doesn't, right? Because I think those
yeah,
two extremes of we're going to change everything we believe every cultural shift versus we're going to keep chanting in German even if nobody understands it, and obviously we don't have much at those extremes, but we get closer to those extremes I think a lot of times than we realize, and just
yeah.
like how you discern okay what is universal and forever and what is cultural and contextual.
Yeah. Well, and I think going with that, with it's not just using social media, but it's also being equipped to use the tools you have to use for ministry. You know, if you're in a church of any size that's more than, you know, 20 people worshiping. I mean, if you're many churches, regardless of their size, regardless of their rural, urban, suburban, are utilizing some kind of technology for
Yeah.
worship, whether it's ProPresenter or Easy Worship or Media Shout or whatever they are. And if you're in a church like I am, where there's not a staff of 30 people, and I don't have a tech director or an AV person, guess who has to learn how to use ProPresenter? The
Right.
pastor does. You know, and yes, you can equip volunteers, but part of unleashing volunteers for leadership is being able to teach them, and it's not doing all the things ourselves, but knowing how to do them is important. But yeah, I got a crash course in ProPresenter, real quick on the fly when I had to start my new church in my living room.
Yeah.
So, you know, but so
No,
those
and I get
some
that.
of those tools, yeah, I think how do we take I mean, the big question is what didn't they teach you in seminary? What does it look like to practically be a pastor
Yeah.
in our
Yeah.
context?
Yeah. How do we, we can, understand all the systematic theology we want, but what does the practice itself look like? Yeah.
For carrying out the life of the church, because there's the practice of, like, pastoral care, which I would argue that CPE classes could probably what do you actually say when you go sit next to your first dying person?
Yeah.
Like, what do I actually do? I mean, I can do an internship or do the 30 hours of or whatever it is, but could somebody just walk me through, like, what do I actually do?
Yeah.
Or the number of young pastors or new pastors have said, like, could we walk through, like, a layout of a funeral? Like, I know we talked about it in seminary, but could we actually, like, just sit down and, like, talk through what cadence do I use?
Right.
How do
Why,
I
what
speak
is
these
where and why, and yeah.
and how do I actually do what I do? And I know that I mean, the knee jerk is for people to say, "Well, we totally teach that to seminary," but I bet if you surveyed 10 pastors, 10 would say, "But no, we didn't learn the real practical nuts and bolts."
Right. Yeah. It's all theoretical at that point.
I mean, helpful. I loved SEM, like,
Yeah.
truly.
Yeah.
I have an intern here, we have a seminary intern, it's exciting, and she and I have weekly conversations, and I every week, I'm like I might be one of those odd pastors that is like, "Could I go back to seminary?" Like, I loved it, and then people are like, "You should do your DMin." I'm like, "Nah, I don't didn't love it that much."
I feel I feel that. I'm pretty sure I spent the whole first day of my first DMin class crying. So
Yeah.
you're not
I
missing.
I I just loved it, it was so transformational, I think, and, um, yeah, so, squirrel.
Yeah, no, you're good. What would you tell your younger self about ministry leadership?
How young are we going? Are we going
You
youth
get to
ministry
choose.
or
You get to choose. Yeah.
I've been thinking about this.
I know. And that's okay. It's good. Think about it.
Yeah, I think that changes every day. You know, um, mm, there's a few things. I just talked to a colleague of mine last week, and, um, the reminder that we have to consistently rely on Jesus. Um, we always know that we have to rely on Jesus, but the number of days in ministry that you really just feel like what you're doing doesn't matter. People let you down, systems let you down, council members, staff, if you have it. Um, I think that one of the things I wish I would have known, and today, what would I tell today's self is we just need to remember to where to fix our eyes. Um, just the comment he texted me last week is, ministry is a roller coaster, and you quickly learn that the only person to rely on is Jesus, and the only mistake we can make is to jump off.
Right. That's a good word.
isn't it?
Yeah. I think for
Um,
life too.
we
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's a lot of days, and we our younger selves, our new in ministry selves can easily get discouraged, and I mean daily, right? Daily discouragement, but to be like, I'm just gonna hop off this ride. And I think the younger self, and this is partially what the benefit of being in ministry now for as long as I have been, is just don't jump off yet. I remember very early in my ministry career, I had a colleague in ministry and he was ready to hang it up. And I remember saying to him, I'm like, give it till 18 months. I distinctly remember sitting at a golf course, golf scramble, and he was done. And he's like, it's not making a difference. I said, you got to give it to 18 months. And even now today, we talk about that conversation about how it would have been really tempting to jump off at 18 months, but that's when you're just starting, right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing. One thing I would tell myself and need to tell myself every day is you're gonna feel discouraged a lot. And um, the key is to just keep your eye on Jesus and remember the why. But that's hard. Find people that you can call and be like, why do I do this? The
Right.
gospel.
Yeah. What am I doing this myself for?
Yeah. I have a couple more. I don't know. Do you want a couple more?
No, no, you're good. You're good. Good. No, I
Yeah.
appreciate the conversation, because I think, the hindsight 2020, it's a cheesy cliche, but there's, one of the things that I like to do as somebody who even teaches seminary is how can I help people learn from my successes and failures? How can people learn from my mistakes so that they make a different set of mistakes than I did, or maybe have a less painful path than I did? And so that's kind of the idea behind the series. Like, there's these things I wish I knew as a ministry leader earlier. That for me, a lot of them were, the ways that I was getting in my own way. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
I totally appreciate the conversation and the passion and the thoughtful. So thanks for jumping on board with this.
Yeah, you just said something, you want people to learn from your failures, and I wonder if something that I would tell my younger self, or maybe, as a reminder for those coming up behind us, is we need to share our failures a little bit more consistently. I think, we go to conferences, we go to gatherings, we go to here and there and everywhere, and and what would it look like if pastors were a little bit more vulnerable in their failures
Mm.
and how they've overcome their failures or overcome difficult seasons? Um, because this is a difficult call. This is a challenging call, saying, "Here I am, send me to proclaim the gospel of Jesus." What Jesus himself says, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. He's talking to his disciples who he's sending out to tell about him. So is it any surprise that in our calls we have trouble, right? But I think
Uh,
one of the things that wouldn't it be a benefit to other pastors, to colleagues, to young pastors starting, or not necessarily young, but maybe second career, but people starting in ministry, is this was a season that was really, really, really hard and really challenged me. Maybe it was a season 5 years ago or it's a season now, but, um, there'd be a lot to gain from pastors being open and honest and transparent about those deserts. What is this? Voices in the wilderness? Like, so that, people that are, if they are in a season that is challenging, they can hear how either they're not alone or you're gonna get through this. Like, um
yeah, or to some sense of normalcy, like, oh, you've experienced
Yes.
and you've come through it and you still have a career and a faith and a family and a life kind of stuff. And I think because ministry
Mhm.
tends to be so isolating,
Oh,
I don't do my, me alone, that's challenged, Enneagram 8 extrovert, my mind is not, idle time is not my friend,
no. Well,
especially.
and so something else that I wish I would have known younger. I was very spoiled in youth ministry. We had a staff. I had a colleague that is still a dear friend, um, but that was a season, and I wish that my younger self would have known or been prepared for future calls where I was alone and didn't have a team.
Yeah.
And, that isolating is really challenging, and and how do you pivot? How do you make the transition from having a staff structure or having colleagues in youth ministry or associate pastors or whatever, and then going to a new season where it's a skinnier staff or you're it.
Right.
But that doesn't mean be afraid to take some of those calls, right? I
Or
think
make them. Or
what's
yeah,
that?
yeah, take some of those calls, but also make some calls to some other people too.
Yeah, find your people, or but I that's the question you asked is what is something you would have told your younger self is this I think that I wish I would have told myself then, these are the good old days. You're gonna miss this, but also, what is the structure so that when you're in a new season, you're not isolated? It is isolating. It is extremely isolating and very, challenging to not have a team when you've been used to having, like, a team. Um, so yeah, that's something. But I think, the last one, I think that something like, we talked about it a little bit earlier with youth ministry, but I'm just consistently learning it, is, um, is how quickly the church is changing. I was aware of it in teen ministry, but how quickly the church is changing, and some of that we couldn't have been prepared for, right? We've, like, seen the data, the shifts in, the church life in the United States the last 10 years. I mean, it's kinda like a snowball picking up steam or snow, not steam, doesn't pick up steam, but,
Yes.
a snowball rolling down a hill, but, um, we have to get real comfortable with addressing how rapidly the church is changing,
Yep.
and whether we want our churches to change, whether we think our churches should change, um, and that's not how we do things. This is not about how we do things around here. This is just the church. Um, we've got 2 options. We either figure it out so we continue to exist as individual churches. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. His church will not fail, but our churches might. Like, our churches may decline. Our churches, if we're not open at least to the conversation of what needs to shift so that we endure in proclaiming the gospel, you gotta have that conversation, gotta be open to the conversation. It's hard.
For sure.
Like, change management is hard. Having conversations that push people who this is the way we do things about around here is challenging. But I mean, nothing about this call isn't challenging, so why
Well,
are we afraid of
everything
that one?
everything of a value is hard, right? Like whether it's
Yeah,
following Jesus or being married or parenting or doing ministry, everything of value is hard. And yeah, and I can resonate with a lot of what you've said. And one of the things I wished I learned way sooner was change leadership and change management. Um,
yeah.
and I really wished I had been warned that you spend way more time on the petty than the significant. That spend more time talking about carpet and emails and thermostats than salvation of people, it feels like sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and
Maybe
and
if I
and
was
that
warned, I wouldn't have responded so poorly to that. Who knows?
yeah. Well, and I what I've learned is people are not as resistant to change for the sake of the gospel as we think they are. I think sometimes and I'm an Enneagram 8 and I'm a driver, and so give me the keys and I'm gone. Good luck, catch up.
Yep.
And so I know my personality type, and I know, like, that's what my inclination is, and that can be energizing or it can be well, it's mostly just scary for people that aren't like that, right?
Right. Right.
Mostly it's just like, "Oh my goodness, tap the brakes, take the keys from her." Um, but But I think that's been one of the really neat things I've learned over the last couple years is people are not as resistant to change if we take the time and slow down to explain the why.
Yep.
Why are we doing this? Why is this necessary? And sometimes slowing down and explaining it is like and it is a 3 or 4 year process. Before right behind me is, a building that it no longer exists because it was built in 1953. Um, it is a, was a, treasured part of the building used for Sunday school. Our elder congregation members remember going to Sunday school in that space. They remember how Sunday school used to be. We
Mhm.
spent 4 years in the conversation about why we need to rethink this space. What about this space that is a treasure to this church, is meaningful to this church, needs to be rethought, reconfigured, reimagined, and we tore it down last September. But we got a new building. And it's not about the building, it's the time we spent explaining the why, helping people understand the why.
Yep.
Us as a planning team, as a council and a building team and a strategic team, for us to make sure we're clear about the why.
Yeah.
Why are we doing this? Why are we telling this congregation that they should tear down their Sunday school wing? We better make sure that we understand. Is it about Jesus? Is it about the gospel? But anyways, I think just people are not as resistant to change as we often think they are. Um, it's just taking the time to explain it, to make sure it's about Jesus for us in our planning, which leads into the question, what happens if we're the ones that are resistant to change? But that's another podcast.
The podcast for sure. No, I like I said, I appreciate your thoughts. I appreciate you coming on as we kind of kick off the series.
Yeah, it's great. You could ask me questions. I should ask you questions now, Marcus.
Well, we
I'm
could
just
do
kidding.
another episode of that sometime. That would actually be fun. So we'll figure that out.
Yeah, no,
Awesome. Thanks, Andrea.
it's good. Do you have anything else? You good?
I'm good here.
Good
Yeah.
for now?
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening. We encourage you to keep the conversation going. Voices in the Wilderness is brought to you by Preparing for Amazement Ministries, where we empower and equip churches and leaders to create lasting and transformational health. Visit amazed15.org to learn more. We also welcome any comments or suggestions. Simply email us at podcast@amazed15.org.